It happened on our 36th wedding anniversary. In a private room at Wyndham House, that overpriced French restaurant with chandeliers like upside-down wedding cakes and a piano that never stopped playing. There were 30 people there, family, friends, our daughter Kate, and her husband, Mark's colleagues, my sister Evelyn, who had flown in from Maine just for the occasion. The waiter poured champagne. The piano slowed into a soft waltz. Mark stood tapping his glass with the back of his fork, his usual "can I have your attention" gesture. I looked at him, smiling. I thought he was finally going to say something sentimental. He hated speeches, but I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd grown a little brave in his old age. But instead, he cleared his throat and said it, plainly, coldly, as if reading from a memo. I've decided to start the next chapter of my life. Without Linda. For a moment nothing moved. Not the fork in Kate's hand, not the waiter who had just begun to pour wine. The room, just seconds ago filled with soft laughter, and the clinking of glasses went dead silent. Every head turned toward me. They expected the crash, the gasp, the slap, the scene. They expected me to break. But I didn't. I smiled. I looked right at him and said, "Well, congratulations on finally saying something honest." He blinked. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Kate let out a tiny "Mom," like she'd just seen me unravel, but I wasn't unraveling. I was untying myself, because what Mark Carter didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been expecting this for weeks. Not just expecting, planning. The envelope was already in my purse, cream-coloured, heavy. Mark's name handwritten across the front in ink so dark it looked like anger. I reached into my bag, calmly, like I was pulling out a napkin. I laid the envelope next to his wine glass and gave him the gentlest nod. "What's this?" he asked. "Something for later," I said. "You're going to want privacy for it." I turned to Kate, kissed her cheek and whispered, "This night is still yours, sweetheart. No one's taking that away." Then I stood up, straightened the sleeves of my navy dress and addressed the room. "Please, enjoy your dinner. The veal is lovely." And I walked out. Just like that. The heels of my shoes echoed down the hall as the door slowly shut behind me. That was the last time I heard Mark Carter speak with confidence. My name is Linda May Carter. I am 62 years old. I was married to Mark Carter for 36 of them, longer than I lived without him. If you asked anyone, they'd tell you we were solid, dependable, a good match. Mark with his charm, his clean laugh, the way he could walk into a room and make it feel like a warmer place. And me, the steady one. I paid the bills. I remembered birthdays. I kept the fridge stocked and the family stitched together. I used to think that's what love was. Not fire, not poetry, just showing up. Every day. Being there. Making things work when they didn't want to. We raised our daughter Kate in a brick house with green shutters and a backyard big enough for a swing set and a garden I never had time to plant properly. I packed lunches. I cleaned up after stomach bugs. I stayed up sewing Halloween costumes when Kate changed her mind the night before. Mark. He played the hero. The fun one. The dad who let her eat ice cream for dinner when I wasn't home, and I let it be that way. I told myself it was balance, but I started seeing the cracks long before the toast. Little things. The way Mark's phone never left his hand. The smell of cologne that wasn't his. A receipt for a scarf I never got. And then, there was the woman in red. I saw her once by accident. Mark had told me he had a work dinner. I happened to be downtown early from an appointment. I parked across the street from the restaurant and saw him through the window, laughing, relaxed. Handsome even. And across from him a woman, younger than me by a decade or more, in a red dress so tight it looked like it had been painted on. She reached across the table and touched his wrist. He didn't pull away. That was 8 months before the anniversary. I didn't say anything. I could have. But something stopped me. Maybe I needed proof. Maybe I needed to see how far he'd go. Maybe... Maybe I needed to prove something to myself, that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't just being insecure, paranoid, hormonal. Turns out I wasn't. Mark Carter was in love with someone else. And for the first time in my life, I didn't fall apart. I got very, very still, and I started paying attention. It didn't happen all at once, the shift. It was subtle, like the way the air feels different before a storm, even when the sky's still blue. I noticed the cologne first. It wasn't his. Mark wore cedarwood and spice, that old reliable bottle I gave him every Christmas like clockwork. But one evening he came home smelling like jasmine. And something sharp I couldn't place, sweet, but not gentle, feminine. It clung to the collar of his shirt like a whisper that didn't belong to me. He claimed it was from shaking hands with someone at a meeting. Right, because businesswomen in consulting offices wear perfume like that. Then there were the phone calls. He used to leave his phone on the kitchen counter when he got home, screen up, like he had nothing to hide. Lately, it never left his side. Bathroom, laundry room, garage. Even when he showered, it was in reach. I once picked it up by mistake when it buzzed on the nightstand. Just muscle memory, and I wasn't even thinking. He snatched it from my hand like I was trying to defuse a bomb. "No big deal," he said too quickly. "Just work stuff." But it was the laughter that really got me. Mark had a certain kind of laugh. Deep, open, warm. I used to know how to earn it. A line from an old movie. One of my impressions. That ridiculous turkey mishap from our first Thanksgiving together. But then, I'd hear him in the other room, talking on the phone, chuckling softly. Not his usual laugh. It was newer, lighter, younger. A laugh with no history in it. And it wasn't for me. He started wearing shirts I hadn't seen before. Ordering wine, he used to say, gave him heartburn. Going out after dinner, saying he was meeting an old friend I'd never met. Always vague, always smiling just a little too easily when I asked where he was going. It wasn't the cheating that stung the most. It was the realization that someone else made him feel like that, like a younger, freer version of himself. And maybe once I did too. But I wasn't jealous of her. I wasn't even angry yet. I just felt displaced, like a book he'd stopped reading halfway through, like something he used to love, sitting on a shelf, gathering dust. And I thought, this is how it starts. Not with lipstick on a collar, not with a confession, with a smile that doesn't belong to you anymore. I've always been the one who managed the money. Mark never liked spreadsheets, and I never trusted him with them. Not out of suspicion, just practicality. He was impulsive. I was thorough. That was our unspoken arrangement for over 30 years. So when I opened the joint account that morning to pay the property tax bill, I wasn't expecting to find anything unusual. But there it was. A withdrawal for $900 in cash. No note, no reason. I stared at it for a long time. $900, pulled out in the middle of the week, at a branch across town. 2 days later, another one. $750. Then a hotel charge, the kind of boutique hotel people don't stay at alone. It was in the same city Mark had claimed to be attending a conference, the one that got cancelled last minute due to scheduling issues. I didn't react. Not right away. I didn't storm into the den. I didn't throw a mug across the room. I just opened a new folder on my desktop and labelled it quietly, May. Inside that folder, I started tracking everything. I pulled bank statements from the past year. I highlighted patterns. I called customer service and requested itemized charges. I downloaded receipts and collected screenshots. Every unexplained transfer. Every round number with no clear destination. Every new account that I didn't remember opening but had Mark's name attached to it. He was good. I'll give him that. Nothing too big. Nothing flashy. He was counting on me not to notice. But I noticed. There was one night, maybe the clearest night of it all, when I was sitting at the kitchen table alone, reading over his credit card statement. I saw a charge from a jewelry store. Something small just under the amount that would trigger a bank notification. And I laughed, out loud, alone. Because I realized I had become invisible in my own life. He was buying her gifts, maybe a necklace, maybe earrings, with money I had earned too. Money I had saved by clipping coupons, by skipping hair appointments, by putting my dreams on the back burner. And I thought, not anymore. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I started a second folder. Legal. And that night I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I slept. Peacefully. For the first time in months. Because knowledge is power. And I finally had it. Mark thought I would fall apart. That I'd crumble right there in front of everyone. The jilted wife in pearls and mascara collapsing under the weight of his announcement. But instead I handed him a gift. It sat beside his wine glass in a plain, cream-coloured envelope. No ribbon, no card. Just his name in my handwriting, written with the kind of calm only a woman who has stopped pretending can summon. He didn't open it right away. He just stared at it, like it might bite. By the time he did, I was already gone. I imagine it was back at our house, or maybe in the car when Cassandra wasn't looking. Maybe he waited until she fell asleep that night, thinking she had won. But when he slid that envelope open, what spilled out was the real anniversary gift. Inside was a neatly arranged stack of documents. I had printed everything on thick, smooth paper, intentional like every step that led there. Bank statements showing the quiet siphoning of funds, receipts from dinners and hotels he'd claimed were networking events, copies of emails and text messages I wasn't supposed to see, some from his laptop, others from the iCloud account he forgot was shared, photos. Not scandalous, I'm not cruel, just enough. A hand on her back, a kiss on a cheek, a room number visible in the corner of a selfie, and on top of the stack, a copy of our prenuptial agreement. Signed on August 12th, 1989, filed with the county, with one clause highlighted in yellow. Infidelity shall result in a forfeiture of spousal claims to shared property and assets. The ink hadn't faded. The law hadn't either. I included a note, handwritten. Happy anniversary, Mark. I'm giving you what you wanted. Freedom, but not for free. And beneath it all, the cherry on top, a court summons. Divorce proceedings initiated. Preliminary hearing scheduled. He wouldn't be able to drain any more money. I had already frozen the joint accounts that morning. He wouldn't sell or gift our assets. My lawyer had seen to that too. I had waited, timed it perfectly. Let him step into the trap he set for me. Because Mark Carter thought he was the magician. But I was the one holding the final trick, the quiet kind, the devastating kind, the kind that doesn't make noise when it lands, but leaves a mark all the same. Her name was Cassandra Bennett. I didn't learn it from Mark. I learned it from a mortgage broker who left a voicemail on our home phone, asking for Linda May Carter's signature to finalize an application. Funny thing that, the apartment she thought they were moving into, the fresh start Mark had promised her, it was in both our names. I had signed the original documents when we refinanced one of our older properties, before he started sneaking around. My name was still tied to the deed, to the equity. She had no idea. Cassandra was younger, but not dramatically so. 38, I think. Blonde. Pretty in that effortless way that suggests she's never had to clip a grocery coupon or iron someone else's shirts. I recognized her face from Mark's charity events. She'd volunteered at one or two. Always friendly. Always curious. I used to like her. The first time I saw her up close after everything came out, she couldn't meet my eyes. She stood behind Mark like a nervous intern, holding her purse with both hands as if bracing for impact, and all I could think was, poor thing. Not because she stole my husband. That's too simple. She didn't steal him. He offered himself. She just accepted what he gave, probably without asking too many questions. No, I pitied her because she believed the fantasy. She believed Mark's promises, the renovated apartment, the vacations, the life he never got to live. He told her he was trapped, that I didn't understand him. That we were roommates at best. She bought the story. Most people would. Mark could sell lemonade to a drowning man. But stories only last so long before the paperwork arrives. The broker who called me was confused. "Your name is still on the loan, Mrs. Carter. We need your permission to close." I returned the call the next morning, calmly and politely. I told them I would not be signing anything. Not now, not ever. The application stalled. Cassandra texted Mark in a panic. I know this because one of his messages popped up on the iPad we shared. He'd forgotten it was still synced. Her words? "You said she already signed." His reply. "She did. It must be a mistake." No, Mark. The only mistake was thinking I was asleep while you rewrote our lives. Cassandra didn't know who I was, but she was about to learn. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. I had planned to tell Kate myself, gently, carefully, when the dust had settled. She was still my little girl in so many ways. Even at 31, I wanted to protect her. I thought I could shield her from the worst of it, keep the ugliness tucked behind grown-up doors. But life doesn't wait for perfect timing. She heard it from her friend, Julia. Julia was at the anniversary dinner, one of the many frozen faces watching the wreck unfold. I suppose she didn't mean any harm when she told Kate what happened. Just shock, maybe even concern. But the words came out fast and messy, like they always do when the story's too hot to hold. Kate called me that night. I could hear the tremble in her voice before she even said my name. "Mum? Is it true?" I sat down on the edge of the bed, my voice caught. "Yes." Her breath hitched, then silence, long, stretching silence, and then, like a dam breaking, the tears. "You should have told me," she sobbed. "How long did you know? Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I couldn't. Because you were planning your move. Because you were up to your ears in deadlines and job interviews and your own life, and I didn't want to darken it. But none of that made it better." "I didn't want you to hate him," I said quietly. "I don't hate him," she snapped. "I hate what he did. I hate that he made a fool of you. And I hate that he stood up in front of everyone and dropped it like a bomb," she cried harder. The kind of tears that come from watching the foundation shift under your childhood home. "I always thought you two were, I don't know, solid." "So did I whispered. We talked for hours that night. She asked questions I didn't want to answer, but did. She asked if I was okay, and I lied. Said yes, even though her tears had cracked something open inside me that the betrayal itself hadn't touched. Seeing her hurt, it broke me in a different way. Because she didn't just lose a version of her father, she lost the illusion of us, of the life we built. And that illusion was hers too. And when your child cries over the fall of something you held together for decades, you realize the pain doesn't end with you. It ripples. Mark thought I was sleepwalking through it all, and maybe for a little while I was, but not for long. Something shifted in me after that night on the phone with Kate. Her voice, that raw, broken disbelief, it lit a fire under me that didn't burn out. I stopped crying. I stopped waiting. I stopped hoping he'd come to his senses. Instead, I started planning. Quietly. Precisely. First, I called Caroline Fielding. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered she'd switched from real estate law to family law after her divorce. I didn't tell her everything on the phone. I just said, "I think I need to talk to someone." She said, "Come tomorrow, bring coffee, and all your papers." Next, I got a P.O. box. A small one, nondescript. Somewhere to forward bank statements, legal documents, anything I didn't want Mark seeing. I rerouted what I could. Then came the apartment, a one-bedroom on Elm Street, second floor. Nothing fancy, just clean, bright, and mine. I signed the lease in my maiden name. It felt strange, almost rebellious, writing Linda May Porter again after all those years. I furnished it slowly: a lamp, a set of dishes, a second-hand couch with firm cushions. I brought books from the house, the ones Mark never noticed missing. I bought new towels, yellow ones. I don't know why yellow, but they made the place feel like sunlight. After that, I found an office space. I'd been out of the workforce for so long it almost felt absurd to try. But something inside me, something that had been asleep for decades, had started stretching, waking up. I used to be good with numbers, organised, practical. People trusted me. I signed a short-term lease on a second-floor office in an old converted house downtown. The kind with squeaky wood floors and windows that opened just enough to let the breeze in. I printed business cards. Linda May Carter, Personal Finance Guidance for Women in Transition. That word, transition, made me smile every time I saw it. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Mark still came home late with bad excuses and cologne that didn't belong to me. He still kissed me on the cheek like a man visiting an old friend, and I let him. I smiled. I folded laundry. I made dinner. And every day I rehearsed my exit. In the quiet, in the waiting, in the yellow towels, and the keys I never let out of my purse. It was a Tuesday evening, 7 days before the hearing. The kind of evening where the air is too still, like the world is holding its breath. Kate had come over for dinner. She brought a bottle of wine and that tight, forced smile she'd worn ever since the anniversary dinner. Mark had grilled salmon. He was always good at salmon. Just enough lemon, just enough salt. We sat at the table like we used to. 3 plates. 3 people. 3 different worlds. Mark poured the wine. He asked Kate about her job, her apartment, her new project at work. He laughed too loudly at nothing, smiled too easily. His hands didn't shake, but something in his voice trembled, a thread of strain under the surface. Kate played along. She nodded. She answered. But she never looked directly at him. Her eyes flicked between her fork and me. And I just sat there. I watched him carefully. The way he buttered his bread, the way he held his glass. He looked like a man playing himself in a film, every gesture rehearsed. He said nothing about the envelope, nothing about the lawyer, nothing about Cassandra, as if the last month had never happened, as if he still believed the performance could be salvaged. At one point, Mark reached over and touched my hand. Lightly, just his fingers brushing mine, like it was still his right. "You look beautiful tonight, Linda May," he said. "That dress is new, isn't it?" I looked at him, steady, held his gaze for 2 full seconds. Then I smiled, not sweetly, not warmly, but with the cool grace of a woman who no longer belongs to the person saying her name. "Thank you," I said. "It's for someone else." He blinked. Kate's fork paused in midair. No one spoke for nearly a full minute. Then Kate changed the subject. Something about a co-worker's engagement. She filled the silence like she was patching a leaking roof. We let her. When dinner was over, Mark offered to clean up. I declined. Kate and I stood in the doorway afterward, her coat already on, her keys in hand. She leaned in and whispered, "How did you get so calm?" I looked her in the eye. "Because this is the last time I ever have to pretend." She nodded. She understood. Mark stood in the kitchen, wiping a perfectly clean plate, and I realized this was the last dinner I would ever have as Linda May Carter, the wife. The next meal I shared in this house, I would just be Linda May. The courthouse smelled like dust and cold coffee. Not justice, not fear. Just the kind of place where too many people had waited too long for something to end. I sat on the left side of the courtroom beside Caroline Fielding, my attorney, my quiet shield. She wore navy blue and didn't speak unless she needed to. I liked that about her. She didn't waste words. Across the aisle, Mark walked in. His suit was too new, the kind men buy last minute thinking it makes them look put together. But it didn't fit quite right. Too stiff in the shoulders. Too clean. He had a young lawyer with him. Couldn't have been more than 35. Probably great at mergers and acquisitions. Probably not prepared for a woman like me with folders labelled and numbered, and a lawyer who had once been called a velvet hammer by a judge. Cassandra came too. She wore a pale blue blouse and a ring I hadn't seen before. Diamond, modest, set on a gold band. Mark's taste, not hers. She sat behind him, ankles crossed, hands clasped tightly in her lap, like she wasn't sure if she was a witness or a guest. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a mouth that didn't smile. I liked her instantly. She looked like she'd seen every kind of heartbreak and didn't have time for theatrics. The proceedings began. Caroline stood and introduced the motion to uphold the prenuptial agreement. She presented the documents, the bank statements, the evidence, everything I had spent months gathering. The judge flipped through the pages slowly. Her glasses slid to the tip of her nose as she read. Mark's lawyer tried to argue expiration, said the agreement was outdated, unenforceable. The judge cut him off. Section 16, she said, tapping the paper. Fidelity clause. Remains in effect until legal dissolution of marriage. Did your client not read what he signed? Silence. Mark's face went pale. I could see the muscle in his jaw twitch. He didn't look at me. Then came the ruling. The joint accounts would remain frozen. The family home remained in my possession. The court would reconvene in 30 days after full financial discovery. The gavel hit the bench with a soft thud. I exhaled. Not in relief, in freedom. Mark turned to me as I gathered my purse. His voice was a whisper. Linda May, this isn't how I wanted it to go. I met his eyes, calm, certain. But it's exactly what you chose. And for the first time in a long, long time, I walked out of a room without looking back. The call came 2 days after the hearing. I was folding laundry in the apartment. My apartment, matching socks that had no memories attached to them, watching sunlight spill across a rug I picked out myself, when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally I don't answer those, but something told me to. I pressed accept. And then, a voice I recognized, but not from memory, from tone, from hesitation, from guilt that had started to ferment. Linda May. I didn't say anything at first, just waited. It's Cassandra Bennett. Her voice cracked halfway through her own name, like even she wasn't sure who she was in this story anymore. I sat down slowly, a damp towel still in my hands. I know I have no right to call, she rushed on, but I didn't know. About the prenup, about what it meant. Silence stretched between us, long, awkward, trembling silence. I'm sorry, she whispered. Not for the affair, not for the lies, not even for loving a man who once belonged to someone else. Just sorry. In that useless, helpless way people say it when they're standing in the wreckage they helped build. I could hear her breathing, uneven, shaky. He told me you were cold, controlling, that you didn't care anymore. I said nothing. I didn't need to defend myself. Her voice was already unspooling. But you're not. I mean, you're not the way he described you. You're... She trailed off. Couldn't find the word. I helped her. Real? She exhaled. Yes. I waited. Then came the part I knew was coming. The panic. He said we'd have the apartment, that we'd be fine. But everything's frozen. And he won't tell me anything. I don't know where we're supposed to go. I let the towel fall into my lap. Cassandra, I said softly, you believe the version of him he sold you. I believed it too once. More silence. You really loved him? She asked. I did. Every version of him. Until the last one. There was a pause. Then, I think I made a mistake. And for the first time since this all began, I felt no fire. No fury, just pity, because she wasn't a villain. She was just the next chapter in a story that always ended the same way, with Mark Carter promising things he never intended to keep. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just gathering the last of my things from the house. The master bedroom still smelled like cedar and shaving cream, though the bed had already been stripped and the pictures taken down. I moved carefully, like the walls were watching me. I opened the drawer on Mark's old writing desk, not to snoop, just to be sure I hadn't left anything behind. And that's when I found it. Folded in half, tucked beneath a stack of business cards and an expired passport, was a piece of lined paper. His handwriting, slanted, clean, unmistakable. There was no date, just the words. Dear Linda May. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every floorboard groan like it's remembering something. The letter was unfinished, 2 paragraphs, then a single sentence trailing off at the end. He wrote that he had thought about leaving me for years, that he'd felt suffocated, misunderstood, that he didn't know who he was anymore. He said he'd met someone who made him feel alive again, who looked at him like he was still becoming something, not already done. That part made me stop breathing for a moment, not because it hurt, but because I had written nearly the same thing in a journal once, back when Kate was still in braces and Mark was never home for dinner. We had both been ghosts in the same house. But then, in the second paragraph, he shifted. He wrote that he couldn't do it. That he'd tried to picture life without me, without our routines, without our daughter. That the thought of splitting everything, memories, money, holidays, made him feel like he was drowning. I don't want to be the villain in your story, he wrote, so I'll stay. I'll do better. I'll be better. But he didn't send it. He didn't show it. He buried it in a drawer and carried on as if he'd never written it. And 10 years later, he left anyway. But this time, not with remorse, with calculation, with Cassandra, with a plan. He could have left with dignity, with honesty, but he stayed out of fear. And when he finally did leave, he lost more than he would have if he'd just walked out when he first wanted to. People think betrayal happens suddenly, but sometimes it's just the echo of a choice someone never made. The first thing you learn after a public unravelling are people pick sides. And not always the sides you expect. Within a week of the court hearing, I started getting messages, some short and safe. Thinking of you. Others awkward and apologetic. I had no idea. A few were brave enough to ask, what really happened? But most weren't ready for the answer. Karen, who had been my neighbour for 18 years, dropped off a pie and couldn't look me in the eye. Sandra, who used to call me every Tuesday after Pilates, stopped calling altogether. But Evelyn, my sister, my storm-weathered compass, showed up on my doorstep with takeout and wine. Let's talk, she said. Or not. I'll just sit here and eat noodles with you. I had never loved her more. Then there were the women who surprised me. Judith, from Mark's firm. We were friendly but not close. She called one evening, her voice hushed. Linda May, she said, I just want you to know. I always thought something was off. The way he looked through you instead of at you. It knocked the air out of me. Not because it hurt, but because it was true. And the ones who stayed silent? That hurt differently. There were women I had cried with at baby showers, carpooled with, passed wine glasses to over decades of birthdays and breakdowns. And they said nothing. Not a word. Maybe they didn't want to choose. Maybe they didn't know how. Maybe they were waiting for me to be small, to be quiet, to be graceful. Graceful. What a loaded little word. They expected me to cry behind closed doors, to nod politely at brunch, to forgive without noise, to fade. But I didn't. I told the truth. I stood my ground. I didn't throw glasses or set anything on fire. I simply held up the mirror and let Mark see what he'd done. Some people can't handle that. They called it dramatic, cold. They said I should have kept it private. As if the man who announced our divorce in front of 30 people over champagne had earned my silence. No, silence was the old Linda May. The new one? She has boundaries, receipts, and a voice that doesn't tremble anymore. Friendship reveals itself in the echoes, not in the first days, but in the weeks that follow. And when the dust settles, you don't remember who cheered the loudest. You remember who stayed when it got quiet. 30 years. That's how long it had been since I'd last sat in a lobby, clutching a resume that was thinner than my courage, waiting for someone younger than me to decide if I still mattered. The night before the interview, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, rehearsing answers to questions I could only imagine, wondering how to explain the gap between my first job at 26 and this moment at 62. 36 years of marriage doesn't translate neatly onto a LinkedIn profile. My appointment was at 10:30. By 9:45, I'd already changed outfits 3 times, settled on navy slacks and a white blouse. Simple, serious. My hands trembled as I buttoned the cuffs, and I whispered to myself in the mirror, "Linda May, breathe, just breathe." I drove slowly, the traffic both a blessing and torture, giving me too much time to think, too much time to question. The office was downtown, tucked inside one of those modern buildings where every door is glass, every wall transparent. As I stepped into the lobby, I realized how long it had been since I'd entered a place like this alone. No mark beside me, no ring on my finger. Just my name, my skills, and the nerve-wracking possibility that neither would be enough. A woman greeted me, Jennifer Brooks, maybe 45, polished, professional. She shook my hand, warm but brief, and led me into a small conference room. She asked about my background, my experience managing finances, household budgets, volunteer work, all the invisible labour women like me had done for years. The labour no one ever called a career. "What made you decide to come back to work?" she finally asked. The question caught in my throat. I could have lied, said I needed a new challenge, wanted something to fill my days. But instead, I looked straight at her and told the truth. "My husband left," I said softly, and suddenly I realized I needed something of my own. She paused, pen hovering over paper. "And how does that feel?" I met her eyes, terrifying and freeing. She smiled, genuine, understanding. Something in her eyes shifted, softened. "Linda May, life experience isn't a gap," she said finally, setting her pen down. "It's an asset, and you have more than most people I interview." By the time I reached my car, tears blurred the keys in my hand. But they weren't tears of relief, they were tears of recognition. I'd spent so many years defining myself through someone else's lens, wife, mother, supporter. But today, for the first time in decades, I walked out of a room knowing exactly who I was. Not Mark's wife, not even Kate's mother, just Linda May Carter, a woman brave enough to start over at 62. It surprised me how loud silence could be. For 36 years, my mornings had been shaped by Mark's routines, the muffled drone of morning news filtering through closed doors, the clink of his coffee cup against the kitchen counter, his absent-minded humming in the shower. Even when we didn't speak, there was always noise, always presence. But that first morning alone in my apartment, the apartment with walls I'd painted myself, with furniture I'd chosen, I woke to something entirely new. Stillness. No television murmuring about the stock market. No faint chatter from sports radio. No footsteps shuffling down the hall. Just sunlight pouring gently through thin curtains and the distant murmur of traffic from the street below. For a moment, I just lay there, listening, feeling the way the sheets moved against my skin, the slow rhythm of my own breathing, the quiet, steady beat of my heart. It felt strange and beautiful, like noticing something precious I'd long overlooked. I brewed coffee, my coffee, strong and dark, and stood by the window, cup warming my hands. Outside, a woman walked her dog, A child pedalled by on a bicycle, the world spinning quietly forward as it always had. But here, inside, it was as though someone had gently closed a door, shutting out all the static. I moved through the apartment, room by room. Every space felt lighter, simpler, clearer. I heard things I'd never noticed before: the faint creak of the hardwood floor beneath my feet, the hum of the refrigerator cycling on and off, the delicate whisper of leaves brushing the glass as the breeze stirred the trees outside. It wasn't emptiness I felt, it was freedom. For years, I'd mistaken Mark's presence as something necessary, like background music you don't realize you're tired of hearing until someone finally switches it off. Now that he was gone, the silence had become my soundtrack, clean, pure, and entirely mine. At first, I worried the quiet would be lonely, that it would remind me of everything I'd lost. But instead, it spoke to me gently, whispering truths I'd buried beneath layers of noise for far too long. I remembered who I was without him, remembered my own laughter, my own dreams, my own voice. I remembered how it felt to choose things because I liked them, not because they suited him. The mornings grew sweeter, brighter. I savoured the small sounds: coffee brewing, pages turning, rain tapping softly against the window, as if they were new notes in a melody I'd just discovered. This wasn't grief, and it wasn't sadness. It was a song I'd forgotten how to sing, one that resonated softly, clearly, through rooms that belonged only to me. For the first time in decades, I could hear myself again. It was raining when Cassandra came to collect her things. She arrived in a small car I didn't recognize, pulling cautiously into the driveway like she wasn't sure if she belonged there. The rain streaked her windshield, blurring her silhouette until she stepped out. Smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched slightly against the weather. I stood in the doorway holding a cup of coffee, feeling strangely calm. I'd imagined this moment differently: anger, bitterness, maybe even satisfaction. But all I felt was quiet curiosity. Cassandra hesitated when she saw me, eyes widening just a little. She wore jeans and a faded grey sweater, hair pulled back loosely, her face pale and tired. She looked younger without makeup, vulnerable in a way I hadn't expected. "Linda May," she said softly, her voice uncertain. "I'm sorry. I thought he'd be here." "He's out," I replied gently. "I imagine he'll stay gone until you're finished." She nodded slowly, pulling a damp strand of hair from her face, and then took a careful step toward the door. "May I?" I stepped aside and she moved past me silently, like someone attending a funeral. Upstairs, drawers opened and closed softly. The quiet rustle of fabric whispered through the empty halls. It didn't take her long. She didn't have much here, just enough to believe she had a home. When she returned, a small bag slung over her shoulder, she paused near the doorway, turning back toward me. Her eyes searched mine for something: anger, accusation, judgment, but found nothing. "He's not who I thought he was," she said suddenly, quietly, almost to herself. I didn't answer, didn't even nod. There was no satisfaction in seeing her realize what I'd known for months. "You must think I'm foolish," she continued softly, meeting my gaze, "that I deserve this." I considered her for a long moment, this woman who had played a role in my unraveling. But standing there, looking at her, all I saw was someone who had believed the same illusion I once did. "No," I finally said. "I think you were hopeful." She exhaled, relief flickering briefly across her face. "I wanted to believe him," she admitted quietly. "But he never really left you behind, did he? He just moved you to the shadows." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew the truth now. Cassandra adjusted the bag on her shoulder, pulling her sweater tighter against the chill that lingered between us. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice stronger this time, clearer, "for everything." I nodded once, a small, quiet acknowledgement. She stepped out into the rain, back toward the car that would carry her away from a dream turned hollow. I stood silently in the doorway watching her go, feeling neither victory nor sorrow, just a quiet certainty that endings aren't always bitter. Sometimes they're simply overdue. I woke up that morning to sunlight streaming across my pillow, the air tinged with the familiar quiet that had become my companion over the last year. It wasn't until I saw Kate's name flash across my phone screen, followed by her cheerful voice, that I remembered. Today was my birthday. 63. I laughed out loud. How had I forgotten? Mark always forgot. Birthdays, anniversaries, they never quite stuck. He'd apologise, buy something last minute, make promises about next year. I'd smile, reassure him it didn't matter, pretending each oversight didn't chip away at something deep inside me. But now I'd become the one who'd forgotten. Not out of neglect, but because the milestones I measured my life by had shifted completely. It wasn't my age I celebrated anymore. It was my independence, my freedom. Kate's voice broke through my thoughts. Mom, tell me you're doing something special today. I looked around my apartment, the plants I'd bought for myself, the cozy chair beside the window where I sipped tea every evening, watching the sun set behind the rooftops, the quiet, comforting stillness I'd grown to cherish. I'm doing exactly what I want, I replied, smiling into the phone. Absolutely nothing planned. Kate laughed softly. I never thought I'd hear you say that. Neither did I. After we hung up, I wandered through the apartment, thinking about birthdays past. Quiet dinners Mark had rushed through, forgotten gifts hastily wrapped. And yet, today, the absence of that familiar disappointment felt oddly freeing. I decided to treat myself to breakfast. A proper one. Eggs scrambled perfectly, toast with raspberry jam, fresh coffee, all for one. I took my time, savouring every bite, every sip, each movement entirely my own. Later, I walked downtown, slipping into shops I used to hurry past, lingering over things I loved but never bought. A silk scarf, a book I'd been meaning to read, a bouquet of flowers, pink tulips just because. By evening, my apartment felt warm and inviting, candles flickering on the coffee table, a glass of wine in my hand. No guests, no cake, just me. The realization settled around me gently. I wasn't lonely. I was content. 63. It sounded old once, like a closing chapter, something that belonged to someone else. But now it felt like an opening, an invitation to live a life measured not in years, but in moments that truly belonged to me. As night fell, I curled up in my chair, watching the city lights blink awake outside. I lifted my glass, silently toasting myself. Happy birthday, Linda May, I whispered. And for the first time in decades, I meant it. It was a Friday afternoon, nearly 6 months since the divorce became final. Kate had driven down from the city to spend the weekend with me, our first visit without shadows hanging over us. I was in the kitchen, slicing vegetables for dinner, when I heard her footsteps in the hallway, quiet and thoughtful. She leaned against the doorway, arms folded loosely, watching me. Her expression was gentle, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. What? I smiled, pausing mid-slice. Did I forget something? No. She shook her head softly, coming closer to rest her hand on my shoulder. I was just thinking about everything you've done this past year. I looked down at the cutting board, blinking back unexpected tears. Oh, honey, it was just... No, Mom, she interrupted gently. It wasn't just anything. You did something most people are terrified to do. You walked away from comfort, no matter how broken it was, and built something new entirely yours. I felt her words like a wave, warmth spreading through me, filling places I'd forgotten were empty. You're my hero, she whispered, squeezing my shoulder softly. Not just because you're my mother, but because you're one of the bravest women I know. I turned to look at her fully this time, seeing the admiration in her eyes, not as a daughter obligated by love, but as a woman who recognized strength when she saw it. My chest tightened with gratitude, pride, and something else, something deeper. You have no idea how much that means to me, I said, voice unsteady. She smiled, eyes glistening. I think I do. We stood together quietly, sharing a silence filled with years of unspoken truths, the ache of old wounds finally healing. It was a moment that stretched beyond motherhood, beyond family, into the core of who I was becoming. For decades, I'd defined myself first as a wife, then as a mother. Every choice I'd made revolved around someone else's happiness. But standing there in my own kitchen, hearing my daughter's words echo softly between us, I realized that for the first time, Kate saw me, not just as her mother, but as Linda May, a woman, independent, whole. And because of her, I could finally see it too. Dinner could wait, the vegetables half chopped, forgotten. I reached out and pulled Kate into my arms, holding her tight. You know, I whispered, my voice full of wonder. It took me 63 years to feel like this, to realize I deserved my own happiness too. Kate squeezed me tighter, her voice muffled against my shoulder. Then it's about damn time, Mom. We laughed softly, both holding on longer than usual. And in that embrace, I felt a lifetime of roles and expectations gently fall away, leaving just me. Not mother, not wife, just Linda May. Brave, loved, and finally free. I remember clearly the first time I turned the key in the door of my new office. My hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the thrill of stepping into something entirely my own. The room wasn't grand. A small space on the second floor of an old converted house downtown, with polished hardwood floors, high ceilings, and tall windows that spilled sunlight across the floor. It smelled faintly of fresh paint, possibility, and the lavender candles I'd placed on the shelf by my desk. I had chosen everything carefully, the colour of the walls, a soft, calming blue, the sturdy oak desk that had just enough drawers, and the chair. Oh, that chair! It was comfortable, elegant, and belonged entirely to me. When I sat in it, I felt a quiet sense of ownership I'd never experienced before. I hung my diploma, recently dusted off and framed, from the university I'd graduated from 40 years earlier. Beside it, I placed the sign that read simply, Linda May Carter, Financial Advocate for Women. In the beginning, the clients trickled in slowly, women who had heard about me through quiet whispers and cautious referrals. Each one arrived uncertain, sometimes embarrassed, often scared, but always hopeful. They were women navigating divorce, loss, sudden independence, women who'd spent lifetimes entrusting their financial decisions to husbands, fathers, anyone but themselves. They arrived at my door carrying paperwork and pain, and together we turned uncertainty into strength. I taught them to protect themselves, to read financial statements without fear, to reclaim their independence, their dignity, and, most importantly, their voices. One morning, a client named Susan, a widow who'd never handled a bill herself until her husband passed, looked up at me after reviewing her accounts, her eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. You know what they call you, don't you? I smiled, curious. Who? She gestured vaguely, eyes shining. All of us, the women you help. They call you the lady with a voice, because you teach us how to use ours. Something caught in my throat, a quiet pride that pressed softly against years of self-doubt and invisibility. My voice, one I'd struggled to reclaim, was now helping others find theirs. That afternoon, after Susan left, I sat in my chair, letting the sunlight wash gently across my face, feeling the quiet weight of the moment. It wasn't just an office. It was proof of resilience, a testament to all the women who'd walked through my door, ready to rewrite their stories. And as I looked around at the walls, the furniture, the diploma proudly displayed, I knew this room wasn't simply mine. It belonged to every woman brave enough to seek a new beginning. But most of all, it belonged to the woman I'd become. Linda May Carter. Independent, strong, and finally, after decades, fully and unapologetically heard. It was nearly a year after Mark stood up at our anniversary dinner and changed my life forever. Nearly a year since I'd closed one door and walked, uncertain but determined, toward another. I'd just finished locking up the office for the evening, turning the key slowly in the door, a comforting ritual now, when my phone rang. The screen lit up with a familiar number, one I hadn't seen in months but recognized immediately. Mark. I considered ignoring it, letting the silence say everything that needed to be said. But instead, I answered. Hello, Mark. There was a pause as though he hadn't expected me to pick up. Finally, his voice came through, soft, uncertain, stripped of the bravado I once knew. Linda May, he said quietly. I wasn't sure you'd take my call. I wasn't sure either, I admitted gently, stepping onto the sidewalk, evening air cool against my skin. But here we are. Another silence, heavier this time, filled with the echo of unspoken apologies and regret. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice breaking slightly. Truly, for everything. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush to reassure him, to fill the awkward quiet with forgiveness or anger. I just listened, feeling a calm I hadn't expected. I never meant to hurt you, he continued softly. I was selfish, blind, and I lost sight of what mattered most, of you. I took a slow, deep breath, letting his words settle gently around me. Once, those words might have meant everything. Once, they'd have pulled me back toward him, hoping for another chance. But now they felt distant, like echoes of someone else's past. I believe you, I said finally, softly. But the version of me you betrayed, the woman who waited, who forgave, who hoped, that woman no longer exists. I heard his breath catch, felt the quiet impact of my words landing exactly as intended. Mark, I continued calmly, gently, you didn't just break us. You broke the illusion of who I thought I had to be. And in doing that, you gave me something precious, space, to become someone stronger, braver, someone who finally belongs to herself. He didn't respond immediately. I imagined him standing there, processing my words, recognizing that the woman he'd called was not the one he'd left behind. I'm glad, he finally whispered, sincerity clear in his voice. You deserve that. I do, I agreed quietly, looking up toward the soft glow of streetlights flickering to life. And so do you, Mark, whatever version of yourself you choose next. When the call ended, I stood alone on the sidewalk, phone still warm in my hand, feeling neither sadness nor anger, just gratitude. I turned toward my car, keys jangling softly, and took a step forward, away from the past I'd closed firmly behind me, and toward a door I'd discovered wide open, leading into a future that was entirely, unquestionably, mine. What part of this story touched you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. If this story felt close to your heart, give it a like, subscribe if you want to be part of a space where real stories matter. Got a couple more minutes? Check out the next story. It's also about the things we rarely say out loud.